What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good Roof Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today's conversation is with Sid Sriram. Sid is the founder of NexGen AI. He's also a migrant from India. And as such, it's interesting to hear his similar experience to Idan Spicer, who we had on recently. Both of them said very similar things when they came to America. Idan was from Israel, and Sid is from India. And both of them said whenever they got here, they recognized that people here didn't see the opportunities that were available to them. They didn't see them or took advantage of the opportunities that were available to them. Now, they're very apparent to an outsider who is used to living in a country where there's not a whole lot of opportunity. So it was interesting to see that both of them saw that almost immediately when they got here. After that, we talked about Sid's journey through college and eventually starting his AI business, NexGen. A very interesting and inspiring journey for sure, having come from India with his family with little to no money, going to college and eventually starting his own technology business. So make sure that you share this with anybody who also is going through their own journey and having trouble overcoming some obstacles, maybe somebody who's getting ready to start their own entrepreneurial journey and they're having trouble pushing themselves over to the other side. Because what you'll see in this conversation is that it just takes persistence, it takes consistency, it takes overcoming your comfort zone and continuing to push forward. So enjoyed this conversation with Sid Sriram. Sid, what's up, brother? Good to have you on the show. You, uh, I think you got a good story behind you because of where you come from and the progress that you've made since you've been in the United States. Last week, I interviewed somebody who had came over from Israel, actually, in his early 20s, maybe. And it was very interesting to see his perspective on the culture here whenever he got here and some of the things he had to adapt to. So I'm curious first, what are the things, whenever you came over, give us a little background. I'll do like another short intro, but I want you to go give us like a short background on how you got here and like what are some of the things you had to adapt to once you showed up.
For sure, man. First of all, really glad to be here. Love the type of content you're putting out. So, my background is my family is all from India, and India is completely different country culture-wise. There's just not the kind of opportunity that you get out here in the United States. So, really, like everyone in India, they have this dream. Like everyone is like, one day I want to come to America. That's like the end goal in life for everyone there. And when I actually came here like 10 years ago, it was like a shock to me how like people take the opportunities here for granted because there's really like opportunities here that you really can't get elsewhere in the world. Like to even strive to start a business, to be financially free, to even have the ability to even have these goals is a blessing because for people in other countries, it's not even, it's like out of even like the realm of possibility because it's like so far out of reach. So I came to the US maybe around 10 years ago, initially came for school purposes. I went to college for computer science, graduated from college a couple years ago, and then I knew my end goal was to eventually start a business, but without the capital to do so and the means to make a livelihood, I spent a couple years in the trenches, grinding out jobs. At one point in my life, I was working three different jobs at the same time, really just trying to stack as much capital as I could to start my software business that I have today. And then eventually, while I was in that process, eventually things started to click together and one thing led to another and led to where I am today. So for anyone watching who doesn't know what I do, I'm the CEO of NexGen AI Solutions, which is a software development company specializing in AI across a variety of industries. And aside from that, I'm also a competitive bodybuilder, which I don't make any money from, but it's my
For
passion
sure.
and
Uh,
love building myself in the gym
it
and
is.
pushing myself to my limits.
Yeah, bodybuilding is certainly a labor of love for sure. It's certainly not something, unless you are a pro unless you're the guy like at the Arnold, up on the stage at the Arnold. You're not making any money off of it. It's definitely something that you're doing because you enjoy doing it. I never got on stage, but my brother-in-law got on stage a couple times. My sister, she did figure competing for maybe
Mhm.
3 or 4 shows. So like I've been in the environment and I was in the culture there for a long time, and I know how much hard work goes into it. And like you said, the payback that you get, there is no pay back. It's literally just because it is something that you're passionate about. So, so I can appreciate the effort that you put in for that for sure. But I want to back up to whenever you came over. You said that people in America take for granted the opportunities that are here, and it is so ironic that you say that. I told you about the guy that I interviewed from Israel. He said literally the exact same thing. He said the first thing he noticed was that people here don't recognize the opportunities that are literally sitting right in front of them. Like he came here and he's like, I can just go start a business. Like I can just go down the street. I can just start an LLC, even for a car. Like he was surprised that you could go buy a car and pay monthly payments to buy a car. He's like, in Israel, we got to go and pay cash for the car. And if you don't have the cash for the car, you're not getting a car. Like you got to figure out another way to get around. So he said the exact same thing. So I think it's phenomenal that you said that you noticed that also. Um, when you noticed that, how quickly was that something that you recognized? And then how did you start to take advantage of opportunities? Or how did you start to, I don't know, conjure up opportunities to kind of like get yourself into?
I think over the years, I've definitely had my fair share of business failures along with opportunity. But what I've come to learn is that identifying the right opportunity, I think it's kind of like a Venn diagram. It's like the intersection of one's skills and the market for those skills. For example, like when I was talking about bodybuilding, right? Like I have skills for it and passion for it, but there's not money in it. So that doesn't really like fit in the diagram. Or something, let me just make something up like trading stocks. Like there's a lot of money in it, but I don't have the skills for it. So it doesn't mean. So I think for anyone, it really just comes to identifying what is actually in the intersection of those two things. And for me specifically, I always had an inclination towards like math, computer science, coding. I had a strong skill set for those from a young age, from school. Those were just the classes that I naturally excelled in. And then as I grew up, I noticed like all the richest people in the world, all like the majority of the top 10 billionaires in the world, they're all coming from the technology industry. So I saw that, identified that intersection of my skills intersecting with the market demand for those skills. And that's when I just decided like, let me just like put everything else to the side and then just go all in on developing this one skill set, becoming one of the market experts here.
That's smart. A lot of people don't take the time to recognize their own personal strengths and own personal skills and abilities. Again, in the United States, you're kind of groomed to follow a certain path. And the path is usually go to school, go to college, get a job, stay in the job. It's not necessarily figure out what you're good at and then maximize what you're good at. Figure out, like you said, the intersection between your skills and abilities and what the market wants. Most people couldn't even articulate what that really means to them. They just know that they need to go to school, go to college, and then get a job. So the fact that you were able to do that was pretty phenomenal. So you did that in college. You said you went to school for software engineering,
For computer science, yeah, close
computer
enough.
science. Okay. So you went to school for computer science, so you jumped into that. Do you feel like school was necessary for you? Do you feel like you got your bang for your buck, if you will? I asked that because as an entrepreneur, I owned I owned a gym for 10 years, a couple other businesses as well. And I can tell you, I could have learned everything that I needed to know. Not everything. That's not totally true, but I could have learned 80% of what I needed to know by just jumping into business out of high school.
Mhm.
and everything would have been just fine. Potentially, I could have been a lot better because I would have had then 4 to 5 more years of experience in business. So, and I think that that's the case for a lot of things. But there are some specialties where it makes sense to go to school because you need more technical information, more technical knowledge. And my feeling is that that would be one of those areas. But what was your experience?
Yes, so you made a good point earlier about how most people are groomed into this like typical path of going to school, hopping into the workplace, and then just working a job till retirement. And personally, I don't see anything wrong with that because I did follow that path as well. And looking back at my time in college, I do agree with you. Actually, I think 100% of the information I learned in college is freely available on YouTube. But rather, I don't regret it from the aspect of at the time in my life I was at then, and the time of life that I think many Americans go to college, which is around like 18 to 20 years old, I had like zero direction in life at that point in time. So I think in terms of like showing like XYZ are the type of industries available to you, these are the pathway to get into this industry. I think in terms of providing a direction, it's useful in that sense. And but yeah, I don't think it's necessary at all. And I think there's certain cases like if you're taking a field of study, for example, like history or something where there's just like no market demand for it, then it's 100% a waste of time. But I think in my field specifically, like computer science, software engineering, that you definitely can see like a high ROI from going to college. And to touch on the path after college, which is like the typical path of graduating, getting a 9 to 5, I think here is where the majority of people make the mistake of thinking that the learning process ends once you leave school. But rather, I don't see getting a job as the end goal like many people do. I saw getting my first job out of college as like a stepping stone. Like basically, when I was working my first job out of college, which was a typical like 9 to 5, I was constantly trying to learn and see like where was the money even coming from? How was the company even making money to afford to pay me? Because in order for them to pay me a salary, clearly they were making more money somewhere else for them to. So I started like using that as a learning experience, like to try to learn like how a successful business even operates. So I think if you look at it from that lens, you can put like a positive spin on this like typical workplace path to never let the learning end. Always take every stepping stone as a new learning experience. And I think that's what allowed me to grow past that point and eventually start my own business from the lessons I learned while being in that 9 to 5 grind.
What I hear you also saying is like, don't take education for face value, meaning um, don't just go to school just to learn the things that are being taught at school. Like you went and what you got out of school was what are the different areas of computer science I could go into? Like what are the different industries of computer science? How could I go over here and use my knowledge to be able to, in this industry or in that industry? So you were looking at it from a different perspective, which is exactly what you were doing when you then went into the 9 to 5 job, your corporate job. You weren't just like, oh, I got to sit down and I got to do this job. You were focusing on all the other arms of the business. Like how does a business run? How does a business make money? Why are they able to pay me the way that they pay me? And what's the profit that they need to make in order for that to happen? So like you were looking into those other pieces and parts instead of just the thing you were doing, instead of just focusing on that aspect of what you were doing. Does that sound right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's how I was able to identify like the fact that there is market demand for my skill set greater than what I was being paid. Like when I was in school, I looking at all the different aspects of computer science, I realized like, hey, AI is a extremely fast growing field. And because of that, I was able to start building those skills and getting into the AI space before it like boomed. And I'm sure you've seen all over the news in the past year. It's been like everywhere. And I got into the space even before that, so I was able to capitalize on all that market demand.
So when you were in school, from an education standpoint, do you feel like you learned a lot? Were you a self-learner throughout that time? Like how it seems like you're able to kind of teach yourself things pretty well. So how, I don't know, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty obsessed with learning, and I think I like even now I'm constantly like every single time that I'm not working in the evenings, mornings, I'm constantly watching like YouTube videos. That's like my main source of information, to be honest. And even in college, I think like to be honest, I think I was like skipping most of my classes and just teaching most of it myself. And I think like having that attitude of like I really don't know shit at the end of the day. It's like always keeps me striving to learn more and more because there's really like infinite knowledge out there. Yeah.
Do you think that that's something you cultivated early? Like, did you have that in high school, that drive to want to know more? Is there something like as a kid, like were your parents pushing you to learn more? Did they encourage you to like think about things differently?
Yeah, I think a big part of that constant learning attitude was definitely stemmed from my parents and how they raised me. Because from a young age, like my parents instilled me the attitude because they're immigrants as well. They came from India to the US. They came with me at the same time with not much money from a poorer country. And they told me from a young age, like, you're not going to be a professional athlete. You're not going to be a singer, actor. The only way you're going to be successful is like using your brain. So they instilled in me that attitude that the only way I'm going to be successful is by constantly learning all the time. So I remember like growing up from a young age, like during like my summer, winter vacations, my parents would always make me take courses, read lots of books during the vacations. And like as a kid, when your friends are like playing outside over vacation, I would hate it. But like looking back at it, I'm very grateful for those experiences because it taught me the importance of constant learning.
Very cool. So you got out of college, you went to you went to, if I remember correctly, Rutgers.
Yeah, I did my undergraduate there, and then I went on to do like a certification from Stanford after that.
Oh, okay. You got your 9 to 5, and then what happened after that? What happened after your first corporate job?
Yeah, actually, pretty uh funny story there, but like at the time, I was also like smoking weed a lot, which was definitely not a good habit. I stopped since then, but I actually ended up getting fired from my first job as a result because I was smoking before work. Manager smelled it on me, and I was like over from there. And that kind of put me in like a fight or flight mode, which I'm grateful for now because I was like, oh shit, I don't have a job. I have to figure out some way to make money quick. And it was like, that's when I really got into the mentality of like grinding all the time, being obsessed with like learning. At the time, I was like also working as a personal trainer at the gym. So pretty much my entire day would be comprised of like training people at the gym. And every single spare moment I got, I would be on YouTube searching up opportunities for how I can make money with AI, how I can make money as a freelancer in software engineering. And then shortly after that, like a month or so after getting fired from that 9 to 5 corporate job, I ended up getting my first like freelancing gig as a software developer with AI. Got my first freelancing gig, and just off that, I was able to work remotely for the first time in my life when I got that. So I took the money that I got from there. I ended up moving to Miami, which I'm here right now. And then since there, it's kind of skyrocketed. I ended up getting more and more gigs since then, eventually too much for me to handle as a freelancer. Then I started hiring other people to help me, and the company just grew from there.
So I want to go back to when you were smoking weed.
Hmm.
So I had another guy on, and he part of his story was he was in, I think, hiring, like seeking out and hiring executives for companies. Like that was what he did. And he did it for another company. And he got to the point, no, wait, he was in sales first. He was in sales first, and he got to the point where his job was real easy, and or he felt like it was easy. Like he was able to make six figures pretty easily, and he could get through just fine. He ended up getting in a car wreck, and after the car wreck, they prescribed him Oxycontin, and he got addicted to Oxycontin. But he was still able to make his money because he knew he only needed to have, 5 or 6 appointments a week and he could get away with that. So he kind of found himself, he was a hard driver and then he got hooked on Oxycontin and then he got fired from his job and then he had a talk with himself. Like he knew he had to turn it around. It didn't immediately click. It didn't immediately happen. He still had to go through a couple of things. He had to move back in with his parents and do a couple of things that he was hard for him at the time, but he eventually learned his lesson and made a change in his life. So that's a big thing for you to do. What was it like? You say you got fired from your job. Was it like an immediate, like, oh, well, I better get myself straightened out and get off this weed, or else, I'm not going to be able to get my shit together? Or did you have to stumble forward a little more before you figured it out?
Yeah, and I think you made a great point because I think in life, the hardships that we face are the best teaching moments. And in that instant, which was more than 3 years ago at this point, I thought my life was over at that point because at that time, I was very similar to the person you mentioned, got fired from my job, moved back in with my parents, pretty much at rock bottom, making no money. And I think those kind of moments really force you to reflect and think on the type of person you want to become. And I remember at that stage in life, I was still so comfortable because I tell this to a lot of people. I think the worst drug isn't weed, OxyContin, whatever. I think the worst drug that anyone can get hooked on is comfort. The second you get comfortable in life, you take your foot off the gas, you start going easy, you think that everything's going to go fine. And that was my problem. I was working this 9 to 5, smoking weed every day. Everything was going good, and then I ended up getting too comfortable. And I needed that drastic change to forcefully pull me out of the comfort zone and made me realize, shit, I have to greatly change how I live my life, or the same shit is just gonna keep happening. And then it was around that same point in time that I made huge changes in my life. I ended up moving completely to Miami. I ended up dropping all the vices. That's around the same time I started getting into bodybuilding as well and replacing all these negative, destructive habits like drugs with positive habits, going to the gym consistently, working on myself. That allowed me to turn my life around. And thinking back on those times, I'm so grateful for those experiences.
Yeah, well, it's someone might hear that you're grateful for that and think that that's hard to imagine because it's like, why would you want to go through something like that? But it's exactly because, like what you're saying. I recently, not that this is super comparable, but it's close. I recently closed a business and got divorced all within about a 3 month period of time. The business I had for 10 years, I was married for 10 years. So both these things were in my life for a long time. And then all of a sudden they were shut off from my life. And I can tell you that during the 6 to 9 month period after that happened, I felt like I grew more during that time than I probably had in the 4 to 5 years before that. Like I felt much different. I felt mentally stronger. I felt more resilient. I felt like I could do a lot more. Like I felt like my capacity had increased. I felt like if something would have came to me, like came at me, I would have been able to handle it a lot more. It sucked during it. Like it was no fun. My physical health deteriorate. I still trained regularly. I actually did more training than I would have done. I went and walked more often. Like I did more things, but simply from the physiological stress, my physical health started to deteriorate. It wasn't terrible, but my resting heart rate went up. Um, I was getting migraines, like other things like that from physiological stress. That's a normal thing, or from psychological stress, excuse me, which is normal. So, yeah, it sucked while I was going through it for sure. But looking back on it, like I said, I feel like there's so much more I can, so much more. Number one, I have the capacity for, and number two, that I'm prepared for now that I've gone through that. So, do you feel the same?
100%. I think like my mentality is that like first of all, I'm like glad to hear that you were able to like come out that a stronger man. And I think that yeah, every single life never gets easier. It's just we get stronger and more equipped to handle the challenges that it throws at us. So now I've kind of adapted the lifestyle of thinking that there's two choices that we have. We either wait for life to throw unexpected challenges at us, which no one wants, or we put the challenges upon ourselves so that it's all within our control rather than coming on us at surprise. So now the kind of life I choose to live is like forcing that discipline and hardship on myself so that it's not unexpected when it comes at me, forcing myself to get those super hard workouts, early wake ups every single day. And then that way, when something else does come at me, I'm much better equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, because when you do hard things, you generally are more prepared for the random hard things that do show up, right? I mean, and there's a lot of truth to that. You're prepping for that time whenever something more challenging shows up. But yeah, to go back to your story and overcoming your weed addiction, well, whether or not you would call it that, but your that time when you were smoking a lot, Dane, the guy that I was talking about and referencing, he said the same thing. One of the things that he said, which was eye-opening to me, which makes perfect sense, is like he was so comfortable, and he recognized that any time in his life that he got comfortable, that's when vices crept in. When he felt himself getting comfortable and complacent with life, and felt himself being digging into the easiness of life, that's when those vices crept in. Like that, whenever he was addicted to Vicodin, or got addicted to Vicodin, that's or Oxycontin, excuse me, that's when that happened. And it sounds like it was the same for you. Like you were comfortable with life, so vices started to creep into your life, and that's partly because you weren't challenging yourself enough.
Definitely. And I think to tie into that, I think that comfort and complacency and those vices, they're all really tied to one thing, in my opinion, and that's with not having a broader vision and purpose for your life. Like when I broke free from all these vices and was able to turn things around, I think the main thing that catalyzed that change was creating that vision for myself. Like, where do I see myself in 3, 5 years down the line? What kind of man am I going to be? And when I visualize that type of person I'm going to become, then it makes it much easier to align my actions in the present with that man that I visualize myself. I think like, is that ideal version of Sid going to be doing XYZ today? And then I think it also removes any like idle time from our hands because I'm sure you're an ambitious guy. And when you think of these goals that we set for ourselves, it's like, if I want to achieve these goals, then I can't be sitting around like watching TV and smoking weed. Like, I need to be like out there hustling. So really, I think like the broader root cause of all these things is just like not having a broader vision and purpose for your life is when these things creep in.
Mm. I like that a lot. So it sounds like you started to turn that around. You said you did the freelance thing for a bit, and then you finally got to the point where that got overwhelming for you. Well, not overwhelming, you got backed up and you weren't able to keep up with it. So you had to bring other people on. When you got into business for yourself, was that the way it was? Like it just kind of stumbled into it, or did you kind of have a vision of getting into business before that, and you eventually just worked your way into it? Was it just like, hey, I just got so many clients that I had to start hiring people, and it was kind of an accident, or is it something you wanted?
I knew that I wanted to start some business since I was young, but I just didn't know like what business. And I tried many different things beforehand. I tried with the gym business as well, like you said, but I never had success with it. And
It's another labor of love, sort of like bodybuilding,
mhm,
to be honest.
yeah, and yeah, when it comes to the tech business, so I was freelancing for a little bit, and then I was maybe freelancing for like I would say around like a little over half a year when I started getting more demand. And then, yeah, eventually it just turned into like a complete time suck where it was like I was spending so much of my time doing this that I was like, the only way for me to scale past this is for bringing on other people because there's only so much that I can do in one day. And then I hired my first employee, and then actually my the first employee I hired turned out to be a complete like waste of money because I they didn't deliver on responsibilities and ended up losing a lot of money from that actually. But that ended up forcing me to learn like completely different skill sets from just like technology and coding into like how to be a good leader, how to be an effective communicator, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a difference between being the technician of the business and being a business owner, right? You being a business owner, there's a whole lot of hats that you wear. In the beginning, you wear all of them. You wear all the hats, and if it's just you, it's easy because you just have to deal with you. But then when you find somebody or you hire somebody, then you have to start putting on different hats, and one of those hats is figuring out how to find someone who's useful for what you're trying to do. And if you find the wrong person, which I think happens 8 or 9 times out of 10, if you find the wrong person the first time, then there's a good chance that you're going to end up on the wrong side of it. Hopefully, you made that disconnection sooner than later. Where people get in trouble is they hang on to those people longer than they need to, which is understandable because you want it to work out and you're like, hey, I want some of this off of my plate, especially in the beginning. Like when you're new, it's like you want some of this off of your plate so that you can then move on to the next thing. So you want this person to work out. But when you hang on to those things for too long, that's when it really becomes an issue. So what were some of the things that you learned about that hiring process that you were able to utilize moving forward?
Great question. Yeah, so I think the first person I hired that I mentioned ended up being a complete failure. The way I went about hiring them was just looking at their on-paper credentials, seeing they had a good-looking resume, so they're probably good at what they do. I hired them. And then there turned out to be a big disconnect between their work ethic and what they had on paper. And then after that whole experience with losing a lot of money hiring them and them not delivering, I what I learned about what makes a great team member isn't necessarily their on-paper skills, but I think their alignment with your vision, especially being a smaller business. I think the employee needs to be on the same page as you, the business owner, when it comes to the vision you have for the business. And they need to believe in the vision just as much as you. Otherwise, there's going to be no motivation to go through those tough days where there's a lot of work, a lot of stress on your plate. The only thing that gets you through those times is eyes on the big picture, where the company is going to be down the line.
Yeah, if you're just in it for a paycheck, then, that makes it challenging to go through, all this work and, all these trials and tribulations if that's all you're doing. Another hard thing is when you look at the hard skills, if you will, just the paper skills that they put on paper, their background, their previous jobs, their degrees, and all of that stuff. It's easy to get caught up in that. But like you said, like you mentioned, like when it comes to work ethic, then and there's a discrepancy there, that is a problem. That's really when it becomes a problem. What I found is, which is a lot what you're talking about, you can teach you can teach knowledge to a degree. What you can't teach or what's harder to teach is work ethic. What's harder to instill in somebody is work ethic. You can do it, you can push them and you can nudge them, but to a degree, like there are some people who just are wired more to work harder and they're happy to work harder, especially if they're bought into the vision. That is a big part of it as well. Like if someone's excited about something that they're doing and something that they're building, then they're more likely to buy into that vision. But yeah, without that work ethic, without that willingness to just do it, then all the degrees in the world and all the background in the world just doesn't mean anything.
100%. Yeah, like I just recently brought on my first like sales hire actually around like 2 months ago. And he's been a pleasure to work with because no matter like the hours of the day, he's fine with working early, late, because he's so bought into the vision and he's so ambitious that like even though he's a younger guy, he's only 21 years old, but I see so much potential with him that I'm willing to take the risk of lack of experience, lack of skills compared to other people on the market because I see the potential and drive in him to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. So when you got the business started and up and running, what were I don't know, what were some of the biggest challenges you found in yourself? Like, what were some of the things you figured out, like skills you figured out for yourself that you needed to build?
Sure, I think the biggest challenge that any business owner faces is making sure that you're not just like working an extremely high hours job. Because, like you mentioned, when you're starting out and it's just you, it's pretty much just a job at the end of the day. It's a job for yourself where you're working pretty much every single role in the business for extremely long hours. So I think the main thing I had to learn was how can I diversify my time from the amount of money that I'm making? And I read this really great book. It's called Buy Back Your Time. And essentially, it talks about how to start separating your business from your time so that you can make the same amount of money or even more while working less hours. So in that book, he goes through like a hiring ladder of the order in which you should hire people for your business. So the bottom tier of that ladder is admin tasks. So basic things like managing your email, managing your calendar. So I started with hiring a personal assistant. She's great. I have a VA in the Philippines. She manages pretty much all of these low tier like admin tasks. That itself saves me like a couple hours a day. Next person to hire is like actual fulfillment of whatever product or service you're selling. And then once you can take care of fulfillment, that again saves even more time. And then the next tier above that is hiring someone for marketing. If you hire someone for marketing, then you have leads coming in automatically without you doing it yourself. And the next tier above that, which is what I'm still trying to figure this out myself, which is hiring people for sales. And I think once I figure this out, I'll be able to reach a whole nother level because once you have a team that can sell for you, then your business is making money without you doing anything. And that's my short-term goal right now within the next couple months. And the final tier of that ladder is hiring like leaders to manage the other people. I haven't reached that level yet, but I'll cross that bridge when it gets there.
Well, it's not a bad thing that you haven't reached that level yet. So I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself for that. But yeah, that comes down to the idea of working in the business versus working on the business, right? If you're the guy doing the work, then you're working in the business. And when you're caught up in the business and you're caught up in the small things in the business, then it's hard for you to focus on the vision. And it's hard for you to keep that vision moving and keep the boat moving in the right direction. Um, Being in the fire of it just makes it more challenging to open your mind to big ideas and open your mind to the next thing that you want to be able to do because you're busy putting out those fires.
Exactly. And when you're on that day-to-day grind of just fulfilling all the time, then there's no time even to focus on the higher level tasks that you mentioned.
And when you're not, and that's the point of getting to the point of working on the business instead of in the business. So you take those admin tasks, you put those and you give those to somebody else. You take the fulfillment task, you take that and you give that to somebody else. And slowly you're pulling these things away from you so that you can then, like, once you get to the marketing level, you're starting to actually work on the business. Like that's where working on the business actually happens because admin tasks are generally just like tasks that you're going to do every day or every week or just things that, right, like you talked about, like just the minutia that doesn't, it takes mental capacity, but it's like doesn't take any serious skill level to do. But then the fulfillment task takes a little more skill level, but still it's usually a repetitive kind of task to some degree. And it's not until you get to the marketing and the sales, the things that actually bring money into the business until you're actually working on the business. So it sounds like you're right at that level where it's like, if I just figure out a couple more pieces and parts up here, then I can really be over top of this thing and I can be managing all of this, um, which is a great place to be. I have not been there either, by the way, and you're 10 years younger than me. So if you get there before me, I will be ultimately upset, but nonetheless, um, it's all good. I'll be happy if you get there before me. Um, is there anything else that you felt like you've learned along the way? Like have you had a mental block somewhere where it's like I got to a point in the business and I got this mental block and I figured this out to get over it.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a learning that I've had more recently within the past 3 to 6 months is looking at the business from a more, what's the word, like a more through a more purposeful lens than purely profit generation. And actually I read this quite interesting book recently. It's called like Dharma Tales for CEOs. Dharma is basically a word in Hindu philosophy, which means like purpose, one's purpose. Essentially, so I've read a lot of business books over the years, and like 90% of them talk about the technical aspects of business, like how do you get more leads, how do you get more money, which there's like a million different books that talk about that same stuff. But what this book really like was a light bulb moment for me was it was like, how do you get more leads, get more clients, while at the same time building a business that's a net positive for society? And what the main thing that I really learned from that book was that it's about empowering those around me. And it's like, if I can make the people who are working for me, if I can make an environment where it's not just me self-developing. If I can make an environment so that they can also develop themselves not just professionally in their skill sets, but also personally in terms of what we were discussing earlier, like their discipline and mindset, then I can not just make loyal team members who want to work for me because they themselves are seeing themselves grow. It also makes them more capable at their jobs to produce more profit and leads as a byproduct. So after reading that book, it was really like a an eye opener for me because I realized like, hey, it's fine if I take a little bit of pay cut and invest more in my people because I'm sure I'll see a return later down the line. And I actually instituted like uh employee benefits recently within the past couple of months of like giving everyone who works with me like a stipend to spend on like courses and books to for them to learn. I also introduced company sponsored like gym memberships because I want like everyone also to be healthy and developing their minds and bodies. And I think like that institutes a culture where the people aren't just working for you for a paycheck, but like we were talking before, they're aligned with the vision and they actually love working for you because you provide an environment that they are able to grow and develop themselves in.
Hmm. I love that so much, man, because not many businesses, more businesses now and over the last 10 years for sure, than previously, but not many businesses think of business in that way. Not many businesses think of having a culture of growth, having a culture of discipline, having a culture of personal development and personal growth. So I appreciate that so much. We at the gym I had for 10 years. Um, One of the things that we did, it was the last, I think, 4 or 5 years of the gym was similar. We had a $300 or $400 a year stipend that everyone got for personal development things, anything that they wanted to do. Now, at the gym, they needed to redo their CEUs every year to keep their personal training certification up. So we would also pay for those. So we'll pay for your CEUs. And then if you want to go to a conference, we'll pay up to $300 for the conference or whatever you want to use that $300 for. It can be for books, it can be for whatever. Same sort of thing. We wanted to support them getting better because not only does that build a culture of improvement for everybody and every individual, then the whole company is also getting better. So it's improving the individual, it's improving the company. And if you're interacting with people around you, it's improving them as well. Like for the people at the gym, our members, they fed off of that also because our coaches were getting better. They could see our coaches getting better and they could feel our coaches getting better. So they bought into the gym a lot more. They bought into our community a lot more. So I just think most business owners look at that strictly from a financial perspective where it's like, oh, that's money out of my pocket. But what you don't see and what is harder to track, of course, it's harder to see, like it's harder to financially track. But what you don't see is the residual that comes after that, all the residual benefits that come from it.
Exactly. And like if you have that culture where people love to work for you, then there's lesser employee churn. So you're not having to invest in rehiring people. You're not having to invest in retraining people, which is a huge expense. And yeah, I think that also another key thing is like having a lean company is better in terms of like, I don't think you need 100 employees to run a huge company. You just need like, I feel like honestly, like less than I've seen like huge companies with like less than 50 employees hit like $1 billion just because everyone is so connected with the vision. Like I think one company I read about recently is like Telegram, the messaging application. I read like they were like a multi-billion-dollar company with like 40 employees, which was like mind-blowing to me.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. But yeah, I mean, you get people to buy into your vision, then it certainly goes a long way. So, before we jump off here, I'll ask you one AI related question since it is literally the hot topic right now, especially in business. What's your vision for what you think AI can be used for? Like, where do you see it being most useful?
Sure. Is there any specific industry you want me to focus on? Because I think there's really like limitless things I could talk about.
That's a good point. Um, no. What's one that you worked on recently or that you have a vision to work on and expand into that you think it could be really applied to?
Sure. So I guess since we're on a podcast, I'll talk about like the podcasting content creation side because I think this is a huge area of application. I think in terms of anyone who's trying to improve their branding, improve social media presence, get their name out there, AI is really good for that. There's a tool called Opus.pro, which I really like. Maybe you've heard of it. You can
Mhm.
take any like long form podcast, put it in there. It'll automatically cut it up, edit it for you, add subtitles, everything. I use that for like creating like content from podcasts, also for just like writing marketing material, writing sales documentation. I'm using ChatGPT for like hours daily to just like it saves me probably like hundreds of hours instead of writing things myself. So I think really like, and with brainstorming as well, I think like anyone can become like 10 times more efficient by just like utilizing chat gpt to ask it questions, then try to think of things or write things out on their own, or even like coming up with logos, coming up with graphics, coming up with marketing material. There's so many like AI image generators that anyone can use.
Since your business is AI, um, what's one thing that you want to be able to get into? What's one application maybe you want to be able to build that is in whatever industry? I don't know. Is there an industry that you like that you have an itch to get into? Is there something that you have an itch to build with AI?
Yeah, I've never gotten into this industry yet, but one of my goals is I'm trying to take my company into like the self-driving car space. That's like one of the most interesting applications of AI for me. I think like self-driving cars, they haven't really gained public trust yet. I know like a couple companies are doing it successfully so far, but the majority of cities, they're still illegal. So I'd really like to see the technology for that progress. And I'm confident that within like the next 5, 10 years, we'll probably see like the majority of cars on the road being completely self-driven.
Hmm. Very cool, man. Well, I hope that you're the one that pushes it over the edge for sure, or at least you're part of the group that nudges it forward. But Sid, man, I appreciate you, appreciate your knowledge. I appreciate your ability to come here, come to the United States, do good work, build something useful, and then strive to improve others. So thank you for that. If anybody wants to find you and connect with you, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, I think the best platforms to connect with me on are either Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm very active on both of them. Instagram, my username is Sid X Sriram. And then on LinkedIn, you can just search my name, Sid Sriram.
Very good, brother. Thanks so much. Appreciate you. And we'll catch you next time.